How can I measure my insulin resistance? If you've seen my videos in the past, you may know that insulin resistance is broadly defined as a subnormal biological response to normal insulin concentrations, meaning the same amount of insulin in the bloodstream is not doing as much as we would expect it to. In the grand scheme of things, there is no diagnosis of being insulin resistant or not insulin resistant. Insulin sensitivity lies on a spectrum of most insulin sensitive to least insulin sensitive. And at some point, your insulin insensitivity or insulin resistance can become so bad that your pancreas is overworking so much to produce more insulin, cells within the pancreas that produce insulin begin to die, and you are unable to produce any more insulin. And this is typically where individuals begin to develop very late stage and detrimental forms of type 2 diabetes. With that being said, we ultimately don't have any specific diagnostic blood test for insulin resistance. However, there are many blood tests that, when elevated or depressed in tandem, can be very predictive of one's insulin sensitivity. The gold standard for quantifying insulin sensitivity is the use of a glucose tolerance test, in which an individual is given a set amount of glucose and their blood glucose and insulin concentrations are monitored for 60 to 180 minutes afterwards to see if they have the normal insulin response and glucose rise and fall that one would expect. The more insulin you produce and the longer it takes to get your glucose back down to baseline, the more likely you are to have more severe insulin resistance. However, this can be changed very acutely by things like your life stress, daily physical activity for that given day and the day before, your sleep the day before, and many other factors. Therefore, we can use many other diagnostic criteria that, when altered in tandem with altered glucose tolerance, give us an even more accurate picture of what is going on internally. Fasting glucose and fasting insulin are often used to help diagnose insulin resistance. However, they do have their shortcomings. For example, in extremely severe insulin-resistant populations, insulin production may actually decrease, while fasting glucose begins to increase. Therefore, although we might expect high fasting glucose and insulin, this isn't always the case and can differ depending on the specific organ that is malfunctioning. And in many individuals, their pancreas can actually compensate for their lack of insulin sensitivity by producing excess insulin, keeping their blood glucose levels normal. Therefore, a fasting blood glucose could look normal, even in the face of exceptional insulin resistance due to compensation by their pancreas producing extra insulin. A biomarker that is a little bit better includes the glucose triglyceride index. Insulin resistance triggers an increase in blood triglyceride levels. Therefore, an elevated fasting glucose and fasting triglycerides may be more accurate than elevated fasting glucose in isolation, and this appears to be almost as predictive as the glucose tolerance test, and can also predict the occurrence of worse insulin resistance in children. Another marker is C-peptide. C-peptide is produced alongside insulin into the bloodstream, meaning for every molar of insulin we produce a molar of C-peptide. However, it has a much longer half-life within the bloodstream, and high C-peptide may be even more predictive than high insulin when it comes to how much insulin you are actually producing. Another marker is HbA1c, which measures how much glucose is attached to your red blood cells. The worse your ability to handle blood glucose because you are more insulin resistant, the higher your HbA1c will be. And there does appear to be a direct correlation with elevated HbA1c and insulin resistance. However, the accuracy of this test really depends on the subjects we are testing, and may be altered in many scenarios, especially in individuals who have an extremely lively pancreas that can compensate for their insulin resistance for much longer than their counterparts. The last test I can mention that may have some predictive value is serum leptin. As insulin resistance begins to get worse, so does leptin resistance, which leads to excess adipose tissue and an increase in leptin production. Therefore, high levels of leptin, referred to as hyperleptinemia, can also be a reflection of the development of worsening insulin resistance. There are many more tests, including novel tests such as microRNA, and other new tests that hopefully will give us even more predictive value. But if you have many of these diagnostic blood markers, along with elevated markers of inflammation, high body fat levels, low physical activity, and other factors that may contribute to insulin resistance, you can be fairly safe to say that your insulin sensitivity is not as good as it could be, and there are numerous strides you could make to improve your insulin sensitivity today and for the rest of your life. With that being said, if you would like an individualized approach to your nutrition and lifestyle to optimize your health, energy, and body composition, send me a DM to sign up for coaching.